I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Exercise is big business. Americans spend tens of billions on fitness centers, gym memberships, and health clubs. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Our guest today is an expert in human evolutionary biology. Harvard professor Daniel Lieberman says we never evolved to exercise, but physical activity reduces our risk of the chronic diseases that make us sick or shorten our lives.
How can you make exercise more enjoyable? Are you tired of all the shaming and blaming?
Our ancestors moved because they had to, or because it was part of the social fabric of their life.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, debunking myths and sharing insights about physical activity and exercise.
In the People's Pharmacy Health headlines, COVID cases started falling steadily in the U.S. in mid-January. They plateaued in March and April, and then dropped again until about a week or two ago. Now, COVID cases are going up again. The weekly average on June 23rd was 11,280 cases. By Tuesday of this week, the 7-day average had doubled to more than 23,000 cases. Over the last week, both new daily reported deaths and COVID-related hospitalizations were up 17%. That's after months of declines. Public health authorities are blaming the surge on the Delta variant. Many people threw away their masks and decided the pandemic was over. People celebrated the 4th of July by going to parties, sporting events, or just hanging out with friends and family. There are hot spots in Missouri, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Nevada. ICUs are starting to fill, but not so much with older people. Instead, those between 20 and 40 who are not vaccinated are increasingly vulnerable. Some public health authorities fear that if we're seeing a surge this summer, things could become much worse once cold weather returns and people spend more time indoors.
Most children have not been vaccinated, but parents are sending them to summer camp anyway. After a year of remote school and lockdown, it seemed like it was time for some fun this summer. Many camps are feeding youngsters outside or requiring masks indoors. However, there still are challenges. Worrisome outbreaks are now being reported in camps in places like Kansas, Texas, Florida, Illinois, and Missouri. And kids are bringing COVID home to family and friends. There's growing fear that children will be carrying COVID back to school this fall. While people between 12 and 15 can get vaccinated, those under 12 still do not have access to that protection. We don't know if that will change before the start of the school year.
According to Dr. Rochelle Walensky, director of the CDC, unvaccinated people accounted for 99% of all deaths due to COVID-19 last month. There's an inverse correlation between vaccination rates and infections in most counties in the country. However, in some places, public health officials have been noting increasing numbers of COVID-19 infections even among vaccinated individuals. Provincetown on Cape Cod has experienced a number of positive tests following the Independence Day holiday. Some of these are among vaccinated people. Austin, Texas is reporting a similar phenomenon. Vaccinated people represent a tiny proportion of those infected during 2021, but with infections and hospitalizations on the rise, even the vaccinated are at some risk. In Miami-Dade County, Florida, vaccinated people accounted for about 1% of all COVID hospitalizations last month and less than 1% of deaths. Experts suspect that the Delta variant is largely to blame.
Researchers have been analyzing data from the UK Biobank. Of the nearly 38,000 people who were tested for COVID-19 between March and November 2020, 17% tested positive for the virus. People who reported drinking at least 1 cup of coffee daily were 10% less likely to catch COVID. The investigators point out that many compounds in coffee have anti-inflammatory activity. This may help explain why coffee consumption seems to offer some immunoprotection. No one should assume that coffee can protect them from infection, though. The best protection is afforded by vaccination.
If you want to stay healthy and trim as you grow older, consider eating whole grains instead of refined grains. Nutrition scientists analyzed data from 3,000 participants in the Framingham Heart Study Offspring cohort. The volunteers answered detailed questions about their diets every 4 years during 18 years of follow-up. People who consumed 3 servings of whole grains daily had smaller increases in waist size and lower fasting glucose levels and blood pressure measurements. This confirms that eating whole grains can help the heart. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. When it comes to exercise, people often have strong opinions about what kind of exercise is best, how much, how often, and when. In fact, a lot of people get exercised over exercise. The human body requires regular physical activity to be healthy, but our guest today says we never evolved to exercise. That almost sounds like a contradiction. What in the world does he mean?
We're talking today with Dr. Daniel Lieberman. He is the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. Dr. Lieberman is the author of The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. His latest book is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Daniel Lieberman.
Thank you.
Dr. Lieberman, you offer 3 useful definitions at the very beginning of your book. Could you please tell us the definitions and the differences between physical activity, exercise, and exercised?
Sure. Well, physical activity is just moving your body, right? If you get up and pick up a paperclip off the floor or go for a walk or, clean the floor or whatever, that's all physical activity. And exercise is a particular kind of physical activity. Exercise is discretionary, voluntary physical activity that we undertake for the sake of health and fitness. So going for a walk or a run, or for that matter, picking up a paperclip because you think it's going to help you be stronger and healthier and more fit, that's exercise. And then finally, exercised means to be anxious, to be concerned, to be vexed, to be sort of confused about something and worried about something. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is that I think people have become exercised about exercise.
Therefore, explaining the title, Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
Exactly.
Now, Dr. Lieberman, we never evolved to exercise. Explain yourself, please.
Well, it's not too complicated, but the idea that you would go out and, like, for example, this morning I went for a 5-mile run, just for the sake of doing a 5-mile run. Nobody ever used to do that, right? People were physically active in order to survive, to get food, or to play, to do things like to gain skills and develop capacities. But for most of our history, for most of our evolutionary history, humans were very energy limited. People struggled to get enough energy, and energy is limited. When energy is limited, then you have to engage in trade-offs, right? Just as time is limited, right? The time that you're spending listening to me right now is time you'll never get back, right? You can't spend it on anything else, right? And so when you spend a calorie on physical activity, you're not spending it on reproduction, on maintenance, and all the other kinds of functions that are really important for your body. And so until recently, we didn't spend needless physical energy on physical activity, i.e. exercise, because it was actually maladaptive, because people had to be physically active in order to survive. And being extra active for reasons that didn't have any benefit were actually detrimental.
Dr. Lieberman, my uncle was a dairy farmer. He had a great appetite. I mean, he ate a lot of food, but there wasn't an ounce of fat on his body. He never stopped moving. Uncle Leo was a lot like some of the people that you've lived with as an anthropologist. Can you tell us the story about the treadmill in Kenya?
Well, yeah. So, I study physical activity in not just in the lab here in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard, but also I work I've been working in Kenya for, gosh, I don't know, a long time, well over 10 years in the same community. And we've been looking at how people use their bodies there and how that transition from being rural farmers that are, subsistence farmers. People in the area where we work don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't have roads, and then they move to the city nearby, the city of Eldoret, and then where they live lives very much like you and me. And so in one of the studies that we were doing, we were looking at carrying, because people carry a lot, especially women. Women carry incredible amounts of water because there's no running water, there's no tap water, right? Any water you want, you have to carry. They also carry firewood and clothing and food and everything, babies. And there's some very famous studies on how women in Kenya could carry huge loads on their heads without incurring additional cost. And we wanted to study the biomechanics of this, and so we had a respirometry system to measure oxygen and a kinematic system to measure their body movements. And we thought the best way to do this was be a treadmill. So we got a treadmill and we schlepped it up there. It's really hard to get a treadmill up into this area. The roads, well, there are no roads for part of it. And we managed to plug it into the closest, power outlet near to where we, the population we work with. And we brought the people from there to the treadmill. And of course, none of them had ever been on a treadmill before. And if you've never been on a treadmill before, it's kind of an awkward thing, right? It's not something we just normally do. It takes practice to learn to walk properly on a treadmill.
Moreover, they must have thought you were kind of crazy, huh?
Well, they loved it. It was fun. I mean, they
Okay.
didn't think we're crazy, but they probably do think I'm crazy. In fact, the word in Swahili for crazy is mzimu, and sometimes I hear that they call me mzungu mzimu, which means crazy Westerner. But so yes, they do think I'm crazy. But it was a lot of fun, and but eventually we realized that we, all that effort and money that we spent getting that treadmill up there was not going to work for us, because we wanted people to walk normally, and so we had to abandon the treadmill. And at that point, I was finishing this book, and it made me realize that the treadmill is just a perfect metaphor for just how weird exercise is. Because think about it, a lot of people in America and spend a lot of money on treadmills, either buying them or going to gyms where they use them to get a machine that's kind of noisy and loud and unpleasant and uncomfortable, that makes them work to get absolutely nowhere. And it's, it's to me, the apotheosis of exercise, doing physical activity solely for the sake of health and fitness.
Well, to that end, health and fitness, when we talk to people about how do you maintain good health, we're always told that one of the pillars of good health, along with a healthful diet, and definitions of that may vary, along with the healthful diet, exercise is essential. So if exercise is so good for us, why is it so hard for us to get up off the couch and do it?
Well, it goes back to that distinction between exercise and physical activity and the question you just asked me, which is, about the fact that we never evolved to exercise. It's an instinct to save energy. When you go to a mall and there's an elevator or a stairway, it's an instinct to take the elevator, even though there were no elevators, right? Back in the old days, right? It's there's that little voice which says, take the escalator, take the elevator, right? And we have to overcome that. So it's an instinct not to spend, unnecessary physical activity. And yet, as you say, physical activity is so important for health. It in so many ways, we still don't even know all the ways in which physical activity is important for health.
Now, you've been looking, if I understand correctly, your research has been looking about how the human body is changing in response to changing conditions in the modern world. Obviously, you may have some information about evolution and the evolution of human gait, etc. But if you're looking at people in the modern world, you're looking at contemporary people. How are their bodies different depending on their conditions?
Gosh, well, I mean, that's that's a huge question. So, I mean, it really literally from head to toe, our bodies, I mean, look, it's, how you use your body affects how it grows and how we age. And so, people who are more physically active or do different kinds of physical activity, of course, affect how their bodies grow and age. And, from everything from what kind of shoes you wear, which affects your feet, to what kinds of physical activities you do, which affect almost every system of your body, your muscles, your heart and cardiovascular system, your thermoregulatory system, your immune system. I mean, we're learning that there's a study that just came out which showed that people who got regular amounts of physical activity, just 150 minutes a week, so that's 21 minutes a day, in California, this was in the Kaiser Permanente system, that those individuals were 2.5 times less likely to die from COVID than individuals who were sedentary. And that's after correcting for obesity and smoking and all kinds of other covariates. So physical activity affects every single aspect of your body, whether you can see it visually or not.
Dr. Lieberman, all you have to do is walk through an airport in America, and you can see that there are a lot of overweight people. Now, that's also true in other parts of the world, but there are a lot of countries where it's not quite as obvious. What happened? Why are we so overweight? In fact, so obese?
Well, that's a complicated question to answer, obviously, because there's no one single factor. But, of course, the two big ones are diet and exercise, diet and physical activity. We have an abundance of foods, including foods that are what we call obesogenic, that promote weight storage. Especially, I think there's very convincing evidence that foods with added sugar are the prime culprit for much of the obesity epidemic.
Right.
But physical activity also plays a role. It's probably, look, if you eat a donut or a muffin from Dunkin' Donuts, for example, now you can get 300 to 500 calories. You'd have to run about 3 to 5 miles to drop the same amount of energy. So diet is important. Physical activity is also important. They have different effects on obesity.
You're listening to Dr. Daniel Lieberman, the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. His books include The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease, along with his most recent, Exercised, Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
After the break, we have a question for you. Do you have to exercise if you want to lose weight? It's more controversial than you might think.
Why is exercise so critical for keeping our bodies healthy?
We've been hearing that sitting is the new smoking. Is that really true?
There's quite a difference between the exercise industry and what our ancestors used to do.
Exercising with other people, playing tennis perhaps, is fun. Does it have other benefits as well?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia Memory Plus. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia Memory Plus has 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that have been proven to help boost memory.
CocoVia Memory Plus is backed by 4 clinical trials that demonstrate improvement in 3 different aspects of memory: long-term memory, spatial memory, and word recall. The studies show improved brain function in just 8 weeks.
You can try the benefits of CocoVia Memory Plus with a 25% discount off your first month. Use the code PEOPLES25 To get the full benefits, take it daily for 8 weeks. CocoVia is offering People's Pharmacy podcast listeners a 10% discount on subscriptions. That code is PEOPLES10. Learn more at cocovia.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
Also by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Today our topic is exercise. Our ancestors moved a lot more than we do. They didn't have cars, washing machines, televisions, or Barcalounger recliners. Getting something to eat required movement. Today, though, food is easily accessible, and exercise is big business.
Our guest is Dr. Daniel Lieberman. He is the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. Dr. Lieberman is the author of The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. His latest book is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
Dr. Lieberman, sometimes people argue about whether or not physical activity is helpful for losing weight. Do you have to diet in order to lose weight? Can you exercise all that weight off? So you've just suggested that obviously we have to look at both diet and activity. Can you give us a bit more information on this question?
Yeah, that's an important question on a controversial topic. So, look, there's no question that you can lose more weight through dieting, although it's in itself a complicated topic for really for another conversation about what's the right kind of diet. But you can affect your energy balance, how much energy is going in versus going out, and also your endocrine, the endocrine system that affects weight gain very profoundly through diet. And as a result, a lot of people say, well, exercise isn't all that useful. And one of the reasons people say that exercise isn't so useful for losing weight is that a lot of the studies that look at exercise and weight loss look at the standard minimum recommendation of the World Health Organization and the Surgeon General and the American Heart Association and every other organization on the planet, which is 150 minutes a week, right? That's 21 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And that's just that's like a brisk walk or more, right? So it turns out if you do that 21 minutes a day, well, surprise, surprise, you don't lose that much weight. That's like, it's like basically burning 50, 60 calories a day. And it's kind of hard to lose a lot of weight by burning 50, 60 calories a day. But if you look at sort of more evolutionary normal levels of physical activity, you actually do lose weight. So if you double that to like 300 minutes a week, people reliably lose weight. They don't lose it super fast. And they don't lose it super quickly, but they do lose it. And the more you do, there's a dose-response effect of exercise on weight loss. People say that, oh, well, if you exercise, you're gonna be more inactive the rest of the day, and you're gonna compensate by eating more food. And yes, that's true only to a partial extent. People don't actually make up all that physical activity with food intake. And then the other issue, of course, is that, and that's maybe even more important, is that physical activity is extremely critical for preventing weight gain or weight regain. So when people go on a diet, the weight comes roaring back after the diet, or of course people have to get overweight in the first place. And study after study after study have shown that physical activity is extremely important in preventing weight gain. So I think that any sensible weight loss strategy or weight gain prevention strategy should include physical activity. Plus, you get all the other benefits of physical activity. So there's nothing lost, only something gained.
Now, Dr. Lieberman, it's not just obesity that's a health problem. We keep hearing from just about every expert we talk to that physical activity / exercise is good for the heart. It's good for the brain. In fact, maybe one of the few things that really can help stave off dementia for some people. And we could go down a list, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea that exercise physical activity is, important for maintaining healthy weight, it's also maybe critical for maintaining healthy bodies.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's, to my knowledge, no system of the body that's not affected by physical activity. And it's been shown to be important for, as you say, just, for, cardiovascular health. It's one of the major ways to prevent cancer. There's cardiovascular disease and cancer are the number 1 and 2 causes of death in the United States. Nothing comes remotely close to physical activity for preventing Alzheimer's. Nothing, by a long shot. The list goes on. It's important for preventing COVID. I mean, and activating your immune system. So this is all unquestioned. But I think we should also be careful about not overselling exercise too, because people look around and they know relatives who've been fairly physically inactive and they live to an old age. And so it's important to recognize that instead of thinking of it as a medicine, as like a magic pill, which sometimes it's advertised as, let's think of it as something that's normal for our bodies. And when we don't do it, we increase our vulnerability to disease. So you just basically, it's like rolling the dice. You increase your chances of cancers and heart disease and Alzheimer's, et cetera, by not being physically active.
Let me ask you about another behavior that's considered normal, and that is sitting in a chair. You have been in communities where people actually don't have chairs. They still sit. So tell us a little bit about that. Is sitting really the new smoking?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a good way in which I think we oversell and make people exercised about exercise, right? And that's is sitting, right? We're told that sitting is the new smoking, and everybody rushes out and buys standing desks. And by the way, I have a standing desk, but standing desks aren't exercise, and sitting isn't abnormal. The places where I work, as you just mentioned, people when they're not being physically active, they sit just like us, except they don't sit in a chair; they sit on the ground because they don't have chairs. But that's fine. In fact, they sit about 10 hours a day, which is about the same as most Americans. And I think we sort of, demonize something as normal and everyday and sensible as sitting. We arouse skepticism and confusion in people. The truth of the matter is that it's not that your chair is out to kill you. It's that a complete absence of physical activity is, as we've talked about, a problem. And so if you sit in your car to get to work, and then you sit all day at work, and then you sit in your car to get home, and then you sit all evening long and watching the television or something like that, well, of course, then you're not getting any physical activity and you're in trouble. But if you sit at work, but you also manage to get a reasonable amount of physical activity, you're fine. Surveys, data show, big epidemiological data studies show that it's leisure time sitting, which is really associated with negative health outcomes, not work time sitting. And also there are more and less healthy ways to sit. So if you sit the same amount of time, but get up every once in a while, you interrupt your sitting with frequent breaks. So get up, and make a cup of tea or pet your dog or go to the bathroom or whatever it is that you do to get up.
Or maybe all three of those.
Yeah, all three of those, exactly. All of that just kind of turns on your muscles, almost like turning on the car engine without even driving. And that turns on all kinds of metabolic machinery in the body. It uses up glucose in the bloodstream and fats in the bloodstream. So really the trick to sitting is, don't sit all day, obviously, but also sit more actively. And if you do that, it's a perfectly normal thing to do. And we should stop demonizing sitting.
Well, we love pills in our society. All you have to do is watch television commercials and you get a sense of that. I remember a decade or 3 ago, there was a product called Jogging in a Jug. And you were supposed to, I guess, drink this special juice formula.
I think it had vinegar in it.
And it was supposed to be just as good as jogging. Jogging in a Jug. What a name.
It's a very disturbing world out there. And there's, but people want cheap, easy solutions that don't require effort. And look, and there's a reason for that. And we shouldn't be, we need to be, compassionate. As we talked about before, look, it's an instinct to avoid unnecessary physical activity. We've created a world where people don't need to be physically active, and then we blame them and shame them and make them feel bad for being lazy. We label them as lazy. They're not lazy, they're normal. And what we need to do is help people understand that, how the world has changed and how and why physical activity works, and help people find enjoyable social ways to do it, and find ways to help make it sort of a necessary part of their lives without coercion, rather than sell them all this stuff.
Dr. Lieberman, a lot of the people that you have studied and lived amongst just move routinely, whether it's to go get water, whether it's to work outside in the fields, whether it's to walk to school if you're a kid. And that was a lot like my Uncle Leo. I mean, he basically was moving all day long, getting on and off the tractor, getting the calves rounded up, whatever it may have been. But for many of us who don't live on farms, for example, what we've evolved to is machines or going to the gym. And so exercise has become commercialized, industrialized, and even medicalized. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you look upon what I'll call the exercise industrial complex compared to our ancestors and what they used to do?
Well, yeah, that's indeed what I call it, the exercise industrial complex. Look, we do live in a world that's, which requires us to medicalize and commodify and capitalize exercise. That's how it works in our society, right? Because we've replaced physical labor with machines. And of course, people are always looking for a way to make money. And so they're happy to sell us exercise, right? And we're happy to buy it. I have fancy watch that I wear when I run that, connects to a satellite, and I wear fancy running clothes and all that sort of stuff. I enjoy that stuff, but I don't, of course, need any of that to run. But I think what we need to realize is that only goes so far, right? The data show, government data indicate that only about 20% of Americans get that minimum level of physical activity we just talked about, 150 minutes a week. So for the other 80% of us, prescribing exercise and selling it, commercializing it, commodifying it, isn't really working. And so we need to find other solutions beyond the ones that we've been trying, right? And to me, that means that we need to really go back to some first principles. And the first principles that I would remind us are that we evolved to be physically active for two reasons and two reasons only. One, when it's necessary, in other words, in order to survive, or when it was rewarding, to go dancing, to play, to do things that brought some kind of social benefit. And I think in the modern world, beyond commercializing and medicalizing exercise, and I don't have any problems with either of them, we also need to figure out ways to make it more necessary. Think about, school physical activity requirements. And we also need to find ways to make it more enjoyable. Because, think about that person trudging in the gym on the treadmill, underneath the fluorescent lights, feeling miserable, doing it because, it's like cod liver oil prescribed by their doctor to prevent, heart disease. It's no fun. The only way they, tolerate it sometimes is, and I do this too, is by, listening to a podcast, maybe your podcast, or, watching something on whatever, on a screen or something like that. But it's not really pleasant. Right? So why not figure out more ways to make it social and fun and enjoyable? And I think that's really what we should be focusing on as a society.
I think that makes a lot of sense. In fact, we have often come across the recommendation that you should find a way to be active with your friends. Find something that you really love doing, whether it's ballroom dancing or karate, whether it's tennis or swimming, something that you really enjoy doing, something that you look upon as play, as inherently rewarding because it's fun, that you're going to be much more likely to do than trudging along on the treadmill, which you can barely stand.
Exactly. But I think there's more to it than just that. I mean, of course, the making it fun is critical. And, if you don't like doing something, if you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it very well. But there are other benefits to doing it socially. So one of them is that you basically create a kind of commitment contract, right? So let's just say you agree to meet your friend, for a run or a walk tomorrow at, 6 a.m. in the morning, right? At 5:45 in bed, you're going to think, oh, God, I don't want to go for a walk. But my friend's going to be waiting for me on the corner. I better be there, right? And so you get there, and then, of course, you encourage each other and keep each other going. And, and so both you create a commitment, but you also create reinforcement. You create positive reinforcement. You end up doing more, sometimes faster, by doing things with other people. And so there's all kinds of benefits to being physically active socially. It's also just what we evolved to do. People didn't go out running on their own in the past. They went running in groups of people in order to hunt. They didn't go walking out on their own to forage often. They went in groups. And, we're social animals. And we, for the most part, we tend to do things socially. I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with doing things on your own, too. Sometimes a run by yourself is a nice form of meditation, or a walk by yourself. That's also wonderful, too. But if you're struggling to do it, and you need reinforcement, you need encouragement, you need a nudge, a nudge to kind of help you do it. Being social is how we evolved to do this, and it's the clear and obvious solution to many people's exercise troubles.
As you pointed out, Dr. Lieberman, there are lots of excuses. It's 5:45. It's so early. I don't really want to get up. Oh, it's raining. Oh, it's snowing. Oh, it's cold. I think I'll just stay in bed. And then there's always the contradictions, like, oh, running will ruin my knees, or and then there's the contradiction which says lifelong jogging will keep your joints healthy. So I wonder if you could debunk some of the myths about exercise, for example, the top 3, because you do a lovely job with that.
Gosh, there's so many myths to debunk, and I don't even know where to start. Let's do with running and your knees, because I'm a runner, and we study this in my lab. But there's an idea that your joints are like shock absorbers in a car, and that if you run too much, you'll wear them out, just like the shock absorbers in your car, and that's just false. I mean, any doctor who says that should start reading the literature, because it turns out that physical activity actually promotes repair and maintenance mechanisms in cartilage that's in joints that actually keep them healthy. And there's actually no data whatsoever that runners are more likely to get wear and tear degeneration. Now, it's true that runners do get knee injuries, but I believe, and there's plenty of data, I think, to back up my contention, that a lot of those are caused by people not running properly. There's right ways to run and wrong ways to run. Running is a skill, and we don't teach people the skill of running anymore. That's obviously another topic, exactly what's the right way to run. But let's see, other myths. Well, another important myth, I think maybe the most important myth that I'm interested in that I discuss is that it's normal to be less active as we age, and nothing could be further from the truth. We as a species evolved to live very long. We evolved to live after we stop reproducing, not in order to retire and kick up our heels, but actually in order to be physically active, so we could hunt and gather and forage and get food and provision and help our children and our grandchildren. And so if you look at hunter-gatherers, for example, they're actually as active, if not more active, after they stop having children as they were before.
Uh-huh.
The reason that's important is that all that physical activity turns on a host of repair and maintenance mechanisms, which slow senescence, that prevent us from aging. And from our immune systems to our muscles to our bones to our hearts, all of those repair and maintenance mechanisms keep us healthy. And remember, back in the old days, you got unhealthy, you couldn't go to a hospital or get drugs. You needed to stay healthy, and it's physical activity that's so important for keeping people healthy without requiring pharmaceuticals or medical intervention.
You're listening to Dr. Daniel Lieberman, the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. His latest book is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
After the break, Dr. Lieberman tells a story about a champion runner who wonders why anyone would run if they didn't have to.
Is it true too much exercise could be bad for you?
Can we make physical activity both necessary and fun in our modern world?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a supplement with 750 milligrams of cocoflavanols, the plant-based nutrients from fresh cocoa that help support memory. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
Exercise has become big business. There are pricey machines to help you stay fit at home. If you don't have room, maybe you would sign up for membership at a gym or a health club. Online exercise classes offer everything from aerobics to Zumba. How do people in other places stay healthy without machines or internet?
We're talking with Dr. Daniel Lieberman. He is the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. Dr. Lieberman is the author of The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease. His latest book is Exercised, Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
Dr. Lieberman, you run marathons, so obviously you enjoy running. But you talk about a runner that you met in northern Mexico at Tarahumara, a guy named Ernesto. And Ernesto said to you, why would anyone run when they didn't have to? Tell us about that. Why would anyone run unless they had to?
Well, that was the start of the book, right?
Yes.
I was finishing up my previous book, which is called The Story of the Human Body, which is about mismatched diseases that we get because our bodies aren't really adapted to modern environments. And I was sort of doing the finishing touches on the book, but I was doing fieldwork in Mexico and studying these, famous runners, the Tarahumara, and discovering all kinds of things. Like, first of all, most of them aren't really runners and they don't run barefoot and all kinds of other things. But leave those issues aside. I was, being a good anthropologist with my list of questions with this lovely elderly gentleman who I was told was a great runner. Actually, I saw him running later on. And I asked him the same questions I asked everybody else, which is, about training for running. And I had been having trouble asking this question because every time I asked it to anybody else, they were like, the translator I was working with was really struggling to try to explain that this gringo, runs 5 miles every morning to kind of be good at running. And they were like, oh, really interesting. But this guy, he just looked at me when she said that. And he said, why would anybody run if they didn't have to? And we're talking about a guy who sometimes runs 50 miles, right? And it kind of just hit me like, it was a eureka moment. That was really when I first started thinking about this book, because that was when I first thought, yeah, exercise is a kind of a weird Western thing that people like me do, but that nobody did until recently. And although we think it's normal, it's not normal. And that was really the start of this sort of journey that got me into the rest of the book.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what you've discovered about the physical activities that people do in various places and how it does affect their health and what we all should be thinking about.
Gosh, that's a huge question.
It is a huge question.
Look, physical activity varies so much across the planet, right? I mean, we have data from hunter-gatherers, we have data from farmers, we have data from people who work in factories in various parts of the world. And look, no matter where you are, who you were until fairly recently, and still in many parts of the world today, people had to be physically active, right? They had to be physically active if they were farmers like your Uncle Leo. They had to be physically active if they were foragers to out get food every day. They had to be physically active even if they were working on factory floors for until recently, because factory floors actually turned out to be a fair amount of work, right? Grueling, long hours, in fact. But now we've entered this kind of world in which we have cars and we have machines that do human labor for us, labor for us, 24/7, really. And that's really where the big shift has occurred. It's really been since the Industrial Revolution and in fact, most especially the post-industrial revolution. And then you combine that with, superabundant foods and that are energy rich, especially in sugar, and you got a double whammy, right? But the thing is that you don't need to be super active, and there's no one kind of activity. So, for example, hunter-gatherers, we have this idea, this myth that they're like these super active, super athletes who are constantly, working all day long. Well, if you put sensors on them and study how much activity they do, in terms of moderate to vigorous physical activity, it's like 2 to 3 hours a day. So, it's a lot more than your average American who's maybe active like 20 minutes a day. But it's not, they're not like supermen. They're not working all day long. And they're not super strong, and they're not, they're not hoisting giant, boulders over their heads as some people might imagine. And so it turns out that, moderate levels of physical activity, which are, a far cry from what average Americans do, turn out to be, have huge benefits. So if you look at a dose response curve, right, and this is, population level because everybody's different. But if you just engage in 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week, right? So that's 21 minutes a day on average of like brisk walking or more. That lowers your age-adjusted relative risk of mortality by about 50%, which is huge, right? And if you get down all the way to like, what hunter-gatherers do, which is, like 2 hours a day or so, 2.5 hours a day, you're actually lowering your mortality rate by about 80%. That's just enormous, right? And you're lowering your vulnerability to heart disease, to diabetes, to many cancers, to Alzheimer's. It's not going to make you live forever. We all have to shuffle off this mortal coil at some point, but it's going to keep you healthy for much, much, much longer, or increase the chances that you'll be healthy for much, much longer. So if you're struggling to be physically active and you're wondering how much to do, just remember there is no optimal dose. There's no optimal type, although, mixing it up is pretty good, and aerobic is sort of your baseline. And if you're, anything is better than nothing. So if you just do 10 minutes a day, you'll get a benefit. If you do 20 minutes a day, you'll get a big benefit. If you can do more than that, you'll get increasing benefits, and eventually those benefits tail off.
Dr. Lieberman, you mentioned longevity, and we had the honor of speaking with a physician and his partner who had traveled from California to a pretty remote village in Italy, where people really lived a long time. I mean, it wasn't unusual for people to be in their hundreds and still vigorous. And he basically said, they don't go back to the theme of your book. They don't exercise the way we do. They don't go jogging. They don't go to the gym, but they live in a kind of mountainous terrain, and they're walking up and down all the time, every day. They may be going to visit friends or family members. They're just constantly in motion. And he said, that and the rosemary that they eat and some of the other foods, the Mediterranean diet that's just natural for them, has led to really long, healthy lives. And so I'm wondering, in addition to the people that you've studied in Mexico and the people you've studied in Kenya, maybe we need to just think a little bit more about how we're moving. For those people who say, I'm never going to be a runner like Dr. Lieberman, but maybe I could go out hiking with my friends on the weekend. Maybe not the same as every day, but at least I'll be moving.
Well, exactly. I mean, look, there's no optimal diet. There's no optimal exercise regime. It's not complicated. Just don't be too sedentary. I mean, and remember, it's not like a pill, right? I have to say, I rankle a little bit when people say, well, all you have to do is take rosemary and walk up and, eat rosemary and walk up and down mountains and you'll live to be 100. That's also not true. A healthy diet increases your chances of living a long and healthy life. being physically active increases your chances of living a long and healthy life. But there are no guarantees. There's no magic bullet. It's never that simple because it's a mixture of genes and environment and diet and what your grandparents did too because of epigenetics. It's complicated, right? But we're always trying to sell people something, right? We're trying to sell them some particular diet regime. We're trying to tell them some particular exercise program, and we're all different.
Well, one of the arguments that's sometimes advanced to justify not moving very much is another myth I'd love to have you address, and that is that you can exercise too much and it would be bad for you. So please tell us about that.
Yeah, that makes me laugh because first of all, there are so few people who are at risk of exercising too much. It's laughable, right? It's so small that the sample sizes are so small that we can't even do statistics on them, right? So that's just kind of silly and irrelevant to 99.9% of humanity. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, so if that's being used as an argument not to exercise, that's like, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I can also sell you.
Well, exactly. But people will grab any justification they can, won't
they? Right. But we there's all kinds of reasons to deceive people and whatever. But the other issue is that whether or not that's actually even true. So there are actually studies of people who do exercise a lot. And, it turns out there's not a lot of evidence that you can exercise too much. So, for example, there's the UK Biobank study was just published, right, where it's a large sample of people in the United Kingdom. And it turns out the people who are really exercising way out at the extreme, their mortality rate isn't any higher than people who are doing moderate levels of exercise. Actually, if anything, it's a little bit lower. There's another big study that was published here in the United States on 661,000 people, published in JAMA Internal Medicine. And again, the people are doing, ridiculous amounts of exercise, far more than I could imagine doing, right? They did not have statistically significant higher rates of mortality. Now, nothing comes for free, right? Everything has trade-offs, and physical activity is one of them, right? If you exercise, you're more likely to, twist your ankle or whatever. I mean, people who exercise do get a higher rates of fibrosis in their hearts, which could make them at risk of atrial fibrillation. So, but they also are much less likely of getting a heart attack. So, there's just always trade-offs, but the balance and the evidence, the empirical data, do not support evidence that you can exercise too much, with the one possible exception of the immune system. And this is highly controversial. I'm not going to come down on one side or the other, but there's a longstanding argument that if you exercise too much, you deplete your body of energy, right? You use up so much energy that your immune system is downregulated and it doesn't have enough energy to fight various kinds of diseases. People have tried to study this hypothesis, haven't come up with a lot of evidence in favor of it in humans, although there is good evidence from mouse models in the lab. But again, we're talking a tiny fraction of human beings who are at risk of this. For the rest of us, don't worry. If you whatever you do, it's very unlikely it's going to have increase your risk of dying.
Dr. Lieberman, there are so many gurus, experts in quotes, who insist that their program is the program, the best program. You should do intense exercise for 90 seconds, and then you're supposed to walk for 4 minutes, and then you're supposed to juggle something for 67 seconds. And people go, oh, yeah, that sounds really good. And I just wonder if you can put into perspective all of the different, we'll say, programs that are supposed to be better than those other ones, and perhaps why that industrialization or commercialization has maybe gone too far.
Well, I think you just said it, right? Look, there are all kinds of quacks and charlatans or well-meaning, experts out there who want to make a buck, or who've convinced themselves that somehow they've got the right formula, right? It's just not true. And the evidence doesn't support it. And look, it's pretty simple, right? A little bit of exercise is better than none. More is better. And yet more, the benefits eventually tail off. Aerobic physical activity is the bedrock of any sort of basic exercise regime. But it's good to mix it up. And as we get older, it's really important to continue to do strength exercises so that we don't become frail as we get older. But beyond that, look, everybody's different. are you old? Are you young? Are you worried about Alzheimer's or heart disease? Are you fit? Are you unfit? Do you live in a suburb with sidewalks, or in a city with no playgrounds and all of us are in different situations, and there's the idea that there's one size fits all solution is farcical. But because people are so exercised about exercise, they're always looking for the next tidbit of advice that's going to somehow make it easier for them, right? And the way in which information is given to us in tiny little tidbits, right? One day you read that barefoot running is good for you. The next day you're running it's bad for you. One day you read you should do high incident interval training, and the next day you read you should just walk. And one day you read running is bad for you, and people get whiplash. And just if you think about what your grandparents did, you probably get it right. Actually, it's not too complicated, and you don't need a professor like me to actually tell you that. But sadly, it seems that sometimes we do need a professor like me to explain why that is the case.
Dr. Lieberman, you argue that we need to make physical activity both necessary and fun. Do you have some recommendations on how we can do that in our modern world?
Well, I mean, there's multiple ways of doing that. But I think that the most important way to make exercise both necessary and fun is to make it social, right? If you make it social, you kind of create a kind of commitment, right, to be there with somebody else. And you also get all the enjoyment that comes from being physically active with somebody else. So I think, think about gym in school, or running with a friend, or walking with a friend, or playing a game of soccer, or whatever, right? Those are all ways that people use to make exercise, physical activity, both necessary and fun. For kids, I think we should double down on our efforts to make sure that schools have adequate physical education programs. It's absolutely essential for kids to run around and get physical activity during the day. And there's no trade-off in terms of time, in terms of loss of educational attainment, because the data show quite clearly that the time spent being physically active is returned not only in terms of physical health, but also mental health and cognition and attention and mood. It's a no-brainer.
Dr. Daniel Lieberman, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Daniel Lieberman, the Edwin M. Lerner Professor of Biological Sciences and Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. His books include The Story of the Human Body, Evolution, Health, and Disease, along with his most recent, Exercised, Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Kaya Biotics, organic probiotic products made in Germany. KAYABiotics.com.
And by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome, now with an annual health club plan. Online at verisana.com.
Today's show is number 1264. You can find the podcast on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you go to peoplespharmacy.com, you can share your thoughts about today's show in the comments section of show number 1264. What exercise works best for you? We'd love to hear your story.
You can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website on Monday morning. You might want to share it with a friend or family member.
At our website, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to our newsletter, you will also have regular access to our weekly podcast. and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.